Are you Michael? Have you ever answered yes to the wrong question and found it was the right answer all along? Lorenzo DeLuca stood frozen in the doorway of a candle-lit Boston bistro, rain dripping from his coat, a loaded gun pressed against his ribs. He'd come to this city with one purpose: to find the man who'd betrayed him 3 years ago and make him pay. The address in his pocket should have led him to an apartment. Instead, he'd walked into the wrong restaurant at the wrong time. Or maybe, for the first time in his life, exactly the right time. Behind him, the rain-soaked street echoed with the sounds of the city. Car horns, distant sirens, the ordinary chaos of lives being lived. Lives that didn't include the weight of a weapon or the cold certainty of violence. For 38 years, Lorenzo had existed in a different world, one where mercy was weakness and hesitation got you killed. His father had taught him that. His father's father before him. Blood inheritance, passed down like a disease. But something about this moment felt different. The warm light spilling from the bistro. The soft jazz playing inside. The way his hand fell away from the gun as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. A woman sat alone at a corner table, her face illuminated by flickering amber light. When she looked up, her smile cut through the dim room like sunrise breaking over frozen ground. Genuine, unguarded, hopeful. "I'm Amelia," she said warmly. "My friend set this up. She said you'd be nervous, but kind." Kind. When was the last time anyone had used that word for him? Lorenzo's hand fell away from the weapon beneath his jacket. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to walk back into the rain, to find the correct address and finish what he'd started. But something in her expression, something bright and untouched by the darkness he carried, held him in place. "Maybe tonight," he heard himself say. "I am Michael." He moved toward the table, each step taking him further from the man he'd been for 38 years. The address crumpled in his pocket. The gun felt suddenly heavy, unnecessary, wrong. And just like that, the mafia boss who never hesitated chose a smile over a bullet. He came to end a life, but forgot the gun the moment she smiled. They sat across from each other, and Lorenzo felt like he was learning to speak again. Amelia folded her hands on the white tablecloth, her voice carrying quiet passion. "I teach art to deaf children at the Mason Center. People always say that must be so hard, but it's not. They experience the world through different senses. More honestly, I think. They teach me as much as I teach them." Lorenzo watched her fingers trace absent patterns on the rim of her water glass. Delicate, intentional. Nothing like the hands he knew. Hands that signed contracts in blood, that pulled triggers without trembling. Why art? The question surprised him. "Because pain doesn't have to stay pain," she said simply. "If you're brave enough, you can transform it into something that helps you breathe again." Something cracked open inside his chest. A sealed chamber he hadn't known was still there, buried beneath years of violence and calculated decisions. Outside, Marco sat in the idling car, phone pressed to his ear. "Boss, target hasn't moved from the apartment. You copy? We can still make the hit tonight." "Boss?" Lorenzo's phone buzzed on the table. Once, twice, 3 insistent times. He looked at it, then deliberately reached over and turned it face down. Amelia's eyes brightened with approval. "Thank you. I can't stand it when people check their phones on dates. It's like saying whoever might call matters more than who's sitting in front of you." "This isn't exactly—" He stopped. "What was this?" "I don't usually do this." Go on dates? Be anywhere that matters. She leaned forward slightly, candlelight dancing across her features. Then where are you usually? Everywhere else, he thought. Every dark corner where fear lives and loyalty costs blood. Working, he said carefully. Always working. She studied him with unnerving perception. My friend mentioned you're in software engineering. That must be demanding. The lie settled uncomfortably in his throat. But watching her clear, searching eyes, absent of calculation, free of hidden agendas, he found himself desperately wanting to be the man she believed him to be. Tell me about your students, he said, redirecting. Her face lit up. She spoke about a boy named Daniel, who painted boats despite never having seen the ocean. About a girl who drew her mother's hands because touch was her first language. About how the absence of sound made these children notice everything else. The weight of a brush, the texture of canvas, the way colors could speak louder than words ever could. Her voice carried a quality Lorenzo had rarely encountered, genuine passion without performance. She wasn't trying to impress him or prove anything. She was simply sharing what mattered to her, trusting he would understand, or maybe trusting he was worth the effort of explaining. There's this moment, she continued, her eyes distant with memory, when a child who's been struggling suddenly gets it. When their hand moves across the canvas with confidence instead of fear. When they realize they can create something from nothing, that they have power, not over others, but over their own expression. She smiled. I live for those moments. They remind me why teaching matters more than, well, more than almost anything. Lorenzo listened, truly listened, for the first time in longer than he could remember. His breathing slowed. The constant tension coiled in his shoulders began to ease. The weapon pressing against his ribs felt foreign, like armor meant for someone else. In the shadowed corner of a Boston bistro, a man who dealt in fear discovered something far more dangerous than any gun: the possibility of being human again. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the weapon you carry. It's the person who makes you want to set it down. If this story is speaking to you, subscribe to join us every evening for tales of love, loss, and second chances. 2 hours passed like stolen minutes. When the candles burned low and the bistro began to empty, Amelia reached for her coat. Lorenzo stood immediately, pulling out her chair with military precision. You're very formal, she observed, amusement warming her voice. Old habits. He helped her into the coat, careful not to let his hands linger on her shoulders. At the door, rain still fell in silvery sheets. She turned to face him, drops catching in her hair like scattered light. I've been on more bad blind dates than I can count, she said with a laugh. But I've never met anyone so polite, or so careful with their words. I'm not trying to be mysterious. Aren't you, though? Her smile turned gentle. You barely told me anything about yourself. It's okay. Some people need time before they can share the heavy things. The understanding in her voice nearly undid him. That's because, he said quietly, the truth escaping before he could cage it. I've never been on a real date before. The confession hung between them, raw and undefended. Her expression softened into something tender. Then I'm really glad this was your first. She reached into her purse and pulled out a handkerchief. Cream-colored linen embroidered with her name in soft blue thread. You have rain on your collar. Before he could protest, she dabbed at his shoulder, her touch unhurried and impossibly gentle. The small gesture, so ordinary, so profoundly human, struck him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. Keep it, she said. pressing the fabric into his palm. So, you'll remember tonight was real, that you were real with me, even if just for a little while. Her fingers brushed his, warm against his scarred, calloused skin. Then she was gone, stepping into the rain with a small wave before disappearing around the corner. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, the handkerchief still warm in his hand. The embroidered name pulsed against his palm like a heartbeat. Marco appeared beside him, urgency clipping his words. "Boss, we need to move. Ethan Morell's apartment is 3 blocks east. We can still catch him tonight." "Not tonight." "What?" Lorenzo looked down at the blue thread spelling out her name. Amelia. A stranger 2 hours ago. Now something that felt dangerously close to an anchor. "Not tonight," he repeated, his voice carrying a finality Marco had rarely heard. He walked to the car, her laughter echoing in his memory louder than any gunshot ever had. In his pocket, the address crumpled beside the handkerchief. 2 pieces of paper representing 2 impossible futures. For the first time in his life, Lorenzo DeLuca didn't know which path to choose. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wanted to find out. 3 days later, Lorenzo stood outside the Mason Center for the Deaf, telling himself this was reconnaissance, strategy, gathering information. It was none of those things. Through the wide windows, he could see her, Amelia, kneeling beside a small boy, guiding his hand across a canvas. Her patience was absolute. She signed something, and the child's face transformed with understanding and delight. Marco leaned against the car, disapproval radiating from his silence. Finally, "Boss, this is a mistake." "I know." "Then why are we here?" "I don't know." It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. The door opened. She saw him, and surprise flickered across her face before transforming into something brighter. Genuine pleasure. "Michael?" She crossed the space between them, wiping paint from her hands onto her apron. "What are you doing here?" He'd rehearsed a dozen reasonable excuses during the drive over. None of them made it to his lips. "I wanted to see you again." The simplicity of it hung in the autumn air between them. She studied his face with that unnerving ability to see past walls, and he wondered what truths she could read there. "Come inside," she said finally. "Fair warning, you might end up with paint on that expensive suit." The classroom smelled of tempera paint and possibility. 8 children worked at easels, their small hands moving with focused concentration. Amelia introduced him with fluid sign language and easy warmth. "This is my friend Michael. He's visiting today." A boy, maybe 7, tugged Lorenzo's sleeve and pointed to an empty easel. Daniel, the child who dreamed in boats he'd never seen. "He wants to know if you'll paint with him," Amelia translated, her eyes holding a challenge. "He's working on sailboats today." Lorenzo looked down at his hands. These hands that had done unspeakable things. Hands that broke instead of built. Hands being offered a paintbrush by a child who couldn't hear the world's cruelty, but somehow still trusted it. He took the brush. For an hour, he painted beside Daniel. Awkward strokes of blue and white. A hull that sat wrong in the water, a sail that bent in impossible directions. The boy corrected him patiently, his hands shaping instructions in the air, teaching without judgment. Lorenzo found himself studying the child's face, the serious concentration, the gentle corrections, the pride when Lorenzo finally got a wave to curve properly. When had anyone last looked at him with pride instead of fear? When had his presence brought joy instead of carefully hidden terror? Daniel signed something, and Amelia translated from across the room. He says you're learning fast, that most adults give up when things are hard, but you keep trying. The simple observation hit harder than it should have. Keep trying. As if effort mattered more than immediate perfection. As if the process of becoming was worth something in itself. When paint smeared across Lorenzo's cuff, bright red mixing with navy blue, he froze. His hands began to tremble. The color looked too familiar, too much like streets he'd walked away from at dawn, like consequences that could never be washed clean. For a man who once painted streets red, colors felt foreign again. Amelia appeared at his shoulder, her hand light on his back. "Hey, you okay?" He stared at his stained fingers, a silent war raging behind his eyes. "I don't know if I should be touching this. Any of this." "Why not?" "Because these hands weren't made for creation. Because beauty withers when I get too close. Because I destroy everything good that crosses my path." "I'm not good with anyone," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I don't believe that." She knelt beside him, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I think you're someone who's forgotten what it feels like to build instead of break." "But Daniel doesn't see whatever past you're carrying, Michael. He just sees someone willing to try. Sometimes that's all that matters." Lorenzo looked at the boy, who waited with patient confidence, brush extended in offering. He took a shaking breath and continued painting. When the session ended and the children left with their parents, Amelia walked Lorenzo to the door. Autumn's sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. "My brother taught me to paint," she said quietly, her gaze distant with memory. "He's been gone for 3 years. I don't know if he's hiding from something or from himself. Maybe both. But I still believe he can find his way back." She looked at Lorenzo, her eyes holding both pain and unshakable faith. "That anyone can, if someone leaves the door open and the light on." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. The name crashed through his thoughts like breaking glass. Ethan Morrell. 3 years ago, Ethan had stolen from him. Guns, money, trust. 3 years Lorenzo had spent hunting a signature on a betrayal. And now this woman, with her impossible kindness and stubborn hope, was the sister of the man whose death he'd been planning. "What if he can't come back?" Lorenzo asked, his voice strained. "Then at least I'll know I tried. I'll know I didn't give up on him when it mattered." He wanted to confess everything. Who he was, why he'd really come to Boston, the weapon he'd forgotten that first night, because her smile had disarmed him more completely than any law ever could. Instead, he said, "Your brother is lucky to have you." She smiled, sad and hopeful in equal measure. "I hope he knows that, wherever he is." That night, Lorenzo sat in his hotel room, the handkerchief spread on the table beside his gun. Marco paced by the window, tension coiling through every movement. "Boss, we confirmed the location. Ethan's in a warehouse near the harbor, armed and paranoid but alone. We can move tonight and be done with this." Lorenzo picked up the handkerchief, rubbing the blue embroidery between his fingers, the same shade as the paint still faintly staining his hands. "If I die here," he said slowly, each word weighted with meaning, "tell them I remembered what it feels like to be human." Marco stopped mid-stride. "What are you talking about?" But Lorenzo didn't answer. He was thinking of paint-stained hands and a child's patient teaching, of a woman who believed transformation was possible, of how love and guilt could grow in the same soil, tangled roots choking toward an ending he couldn't yet see. The weeks that followed felt like borrowed time, stolen from a life Lorenzo knew he didn't deserve. He told himself he was gathering intelligence, watching Ethan's movements, waiting for the optimal moment to strike. But the truth that kept him awake at night, was simpler and more terrifying. He was falling in love. Falling for the way Amelia signed thank you to the barista who memorized her coffee order, for how she hummed unconsciously while mixing paints, completely unaware she was doing it, for the small scar above her left eyebrow and the story behind it, a bike accident at 9, her brother catching her before she hit the pavement, telling her she was brave even while she cried. They met for coffee, then dinner, then long walks through Boston Common as October surrendered to November. She asked about his life, and he answered in half-truths and careful omissions, each lie adding weight to a debt he didn't know how to repay. One evening, they found themselves at St. Catherine's Church. Amelia had wanted to show him where she sometimes brought her students. The stained glass windows, she explained, taught them how broken pieces could become something transcendent when held together with purpose. Inside, a nun was arranging white lilies at the altar. She looked up as they entered, her weathered face holding both kindness and a knowing quality that made Lorenzo uneasy. "Amelia, dear, and you've brought a friend. Sister Evelyn, this is Michael." The nun's gaze settled on Lorenzo for a moment longer than comfortable, as if she could see the weight of every choice he'd ever made. "Welcome, son. Any friend of Amelia's is welcome in this house." They sat in a worn pew while Amelia sketched the afternoon light pouring through the rose window. Lorenzo watched her work, mesmerized by the way her pencil captured something intangible. Grace, maybe, or the possibility of redemption. The church was quiet except for the soft scratch of her pencil and the distant sound of Sister Evelyn humming while she worked. Lorenzo felt something unknot inside him, a tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. In this space, surrounded by stone and stained glass and the weight of centuries of prayers, he felt almost anonymous. Not Lorenzo De Luca, son of a crime family. Not a man defined by violence, just someone sitting in silence, watching light transform into art. "You remind me of someone carrying a shadow they can't outrun," she said suddenly, not looking up from her sketch. He tensed. "What do you mean?" "I work with children who can't hear, Michael. I've learned to watch what people don't say." She set down her pencil, meeting his eyes. "You move like you're always ready to leave, like you don't trust anything to last." "Maybe I don't." "Why?" "Because I'm not the man you think I am. Because every moment with you builds a lie I can't sustain. Because your brother's blood debt is the only thing that brought me to this city, and you're the only thing making me want to stay." "Complicated history," he said instead. She shifted closer, her knee brushing his on the wooden pew. "Can I tell you something?" "Always. When my brother disappeared, I blamed myself for months. Thought if I'd been more observant, if I'd said the right words, if I'd tried harder, he wouldn't have run." She looked toward the altar where Sister Evelyn worked. "But Sister Evelyn told me something that changed how I saw everything. She said we can't save people from their choices. We can only love them through the consequences." Lorenzo's throat tightened painfully. "Your faith is inspirational," he managed. "It's not really faith. It's stubbornness wrapped in hope." A slight smile crossed her lips. "The belief that even people who've made terrible mistakes can find their way back. That redemption isn't just a religious concept. It's something tangible if you're brave enough to reach for it." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Waiting for someone who might never come home?" "Every single day." She met his gaze without flinching. But I'd regret giving up on him more. Some people are worth the wait, worth the faith, even when it's hard. He reached over then, couldn't stop himself, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the church's chill, small and paint-stained and achingly real. "You're a better person than anyone I've ever known," he said quietly. "You don't know me that well yet." "I know enough." She squeezed his hand, and for one perfect, suspended moment, Lorenzo let himself imagine a different life. One where he was Michael the software engineer, where his greatest crime was falling in love with a woman too good for him, where the past couldn't reach forward and destroy everything he touched. But reality never stayed in the margins for long. The file landed on Lorenzo's hotel desk with the weight of a death sentence. Marco stood by the window, his expression grim in the harsh lamplight. "Boss, we got a problem, a big one." Lorenzo opened the folder. His world tilted violently. Amelia Morell, age 26. Occupation, art teacher, Mason Center for the Deaf. Family, Ethan Morell, brother, current whereabouts confirmed. Beneath the report was a photograph. Amelia, at 17, standing beside a young man with the same brown eyes and gentle smile. Both of them laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Both of them whole, before betrayal carved its permanent mark. Lorenzo's hands shook so badly the folder slipped from his grip, papers scattering across the floor like shrapnel. The room tilted. His vision narrowed. Every conversation with Amelia replayed in his mind with sickening clarity. Her mention of a lost brother, her faith that anyone could find their way back, her belief in redemption. She'd been talking about Ethan. The whole time, every word about hope and second chances had been about the man Lorenzo had sworn to kill. He'd fallen in love with his enemy's sister. Worse, she'd fallen in love with him, with a lie, with a version of himself that had never truly existed. Michael the software engineer was a ghost. Lorenzo DeLuca, the man who'd come to destroy her family, was the reality she'd eventually have to face. And it would destroy her. "You had to know," Marco said carefully, watching his boss's face. "You had to suspect something." "I didn't." "Boss? I said I didn't know." His voice came out shattered. "How long have you had this?" "Confirmed it 2 days ago. I wanted to be absolutely certain before." "Get out!" "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Just get out. Now." The door closed with careful softness, leaving Lorenzo alone with the evidence of his own blindness. He'd fallen in love with Ethan Morell's sister, the woman who'd taught him to paint, who'd shown him colors could exist without violence, who'd made him believe in redemption. She was protecting the man he'd sworn to destroy. His phone buzzed. A text from Amelia. "Finished a new painting. Want to be the first to see it?" He shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed at him to stay away, cut the connection, remember why he'd come to Boston in the first place. His feet carried him to the art center anyway, drawn by a force stronger than revenge or reason. The classroom was empty except for Amelia on a stepladder, hanging a large canvas on the far wall. She didn't hear him enter. Lorenzo stopped in the doorway, and his breath caught painfully in his chest. The painting showed a man standing in a field of sunflowers, golden light pouring around his silhouette. But in his hands, where the pastoral scene demanded innocence, there was the faint outline of a gun. Not threatening, but present. A shadow of violence in a landscape yearning for peace. The contrast was devastating, hopeful and haunting in equal measure. She stepped down from the ladder, catching sight of him. "Michael, You came. He couldn't speak, could only stare at the painting, at the man who looked nothing like him and yet felt like a portrait of his fractured soul. "What do you think?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. Pride and vulnerability mixed in her expression. "I call it the man without the gun. It's about the person someone could become if they put down the thing that defines them. If they chose something different. What if they can't put it down?" The words scraped out of his throat. Can't or won't? He turned to look at her, memorizing every detail. The paint smudge on her cheek, the hope shining in her eyes, the way she looked at him like he was worth the faith she was investing. What if putting it down means betraying everything they've ever known, everyone they've ever been? Amelia tilted her head, studying him with that perception that stripped away all his defenses. Then maybe what they've known has been betraying them all along. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted to confess everything, wanted to scream the truth, that her brother was the reason for every sleepless night for 3 years, that vengeance had been his North Star, that loving her was both the best and worst thing that had ever happened to him. Instead, he turned toward the door. "I have to go." "Michael, I'm sorry." He walked out before she could see his face break, before she could ask questions that would destroy them both with their answers. That night, Marco found him on the hotel roof, staring at the city lights sprawled below like scattered stars. "We confirmed Ethan's location," Marco said quietly. "He's moving product tomorrow night. Old warehouse near the harbor. This is it, boss. This is our window." Lorenzo said nothing. The painting burned into his memory. A man with a gun among sunflowers. A choice illustrated in oil and hope. "What do you do?" Marco asked, his voice heavy with the impossible question. "When the only person you want to live for is the sister of the man you came here to kill?" The city sprawled below them, indifferent to the weight of that question, indifferent to the war raging inside Lorenzo's chest. He thought of Amelia's unshakable faith, of Sister Evelyn's quiet wisdom about loving people through consequences, of a child named Daniel who'd taught him that hands could create instead of destroy. "I don't know," he finally said, "but tomorrow, I'll find out." The address led to a crumbling row house in South Boston, the kind of place where hope went to die and secrets went to rot. Lorenzo stood across the street, his gun heavy in his hand. This was it. 3 years of hunting, 3 years of controlled rage, all condensing into this single moment. Ethan Morrell was inside that house, wounded from a deal gone sideways, alone, vulnerable. Marco had confirmed it an hour ago. It should have been simple. It should have been justice. But Lorenzo's hand trembled on the grip. He thought of Amelia's painting, of the man who could choose to set down the weapon, of her stubborn, motivational belief that anyone could find their way back if someone left the door open. He crossed the street, each step feeling like a choice that would define the rest of his life. The front door hung loose on corroded hinges. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and desperation. Lorenzo moved through the darkness with practiced silence, every nerve alert, every instinct screaming for him to finish this and be done. Each step echoed in the empty rooms. Abandoned furniture cast strange shadows in the dim light, filtering through broken windows. This was the end of the line. For Ethan, for the betrayal that had haunted Lorenzo for 3 years, for the rage that had driven him across state lines with a gun and a name. But with each step deeper into the house, Lorenzo felt that rage flickering, replaced by something more complicated. He thought of Amelia's painting, of Daniel's patient teaching, of Sister Evelyn asking if he could forgive, of the handkerchief he still carried, her name embroidered in blue thread that matched the paint he'd learned to use instead of blood. "What are you doing here?" he asked himself. "Finishing what you started? Or destroying the only good thing that's ever happened to you?" He found Ethan in what used to be a kitchen, slumped against the wall with a makeshift bandage soaked through with blood. The man looked up, and his eyes, Amelia's eyes, widened with recognition and weary resignation. "DeLuca," Ethan rasped. "Wondered when you'd finally track me down." Lorenzo raised the gun, his aim steady despite the war raging in his chest. 3 years. I know. You stole from me, made me look weak. Cost me... His voice cracked. "Cost me everything." "I know." Ethan's face was gray with pain and something deeper. Regret, maybe. Or acceptance. "You want to know why I did it? I don't care about your reasons. Maybe you should." Ethan coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Your father killed mine. 20 years ago. I was 8 years old. My sister was 4. She doesn't remember him, doesn't remember the funeral or the years after when everything fell apart. But I do, every single day." The words hit Lorenzo like physical blows. "So yeah, I stole from you," Ethan continued, his voice fading. "I wanted you to feel what I felt. Wanted to hurt you the way your family hurt mine. Stupid, right? Like more blood would somehow balance the scales. But it didn't. And now my sister, my brilliant, kind sister who still believes in good, she's alone because of choices I made. Just like I was alone because of choices your father made." He met Lorenzo's eyes. "When does it end, DeLuca? When does the Mafia blood stop poisoning everyone it touches? When does it end?" The question hung in the dusty air between them. "Boss!" Marco's voice crackled through Lorenzo's earpiece. "We got movement. Someone's coming." The door burst open. Amelia stood framed in the doorway, her face pale with terror and dawning understanding. Her eyes went from Lorenzo to the gun to her brother slumped against the wall, taking in the scene in one horrified moment. "No," she whispered. Then louder, "Michael." "That's not his name," Ethan said weakly. "His name is Lorenzo DeLuca. He's Mafia. And he's here because of what I did 3 years ago." The words struck her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. "You..." She looked at Lorenzo, betrayal etched across every feature. "You came here to kill my brother." Lorenzo couldn't speak. The gun felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I've been looking for Ethan for 3 years, she said, her voice shaking. "When you started showing up, when your friend Marco made those calls from your hotel asking questions, I knew. I've always known what my brother was involved in. I just didn't know what you were." She took a shuddering breath. "So I followed you tonight, and I was right." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice grew steady, fierce with conviction. "If you have any humanity left, any piece of the man who painted boats with Daniel, who held my hand in a church and looked like he wanted to believe in something good, put down the gun." She stepped toward him, fearless in her heartbreak, "and choose something different, not revenge, not more blood, but mercy, real mercy, the kind that costs you something." Lorenzo's hand shook violently. The gun felt foreign now, wrong, a relic from a life that no longer fit. "He betrayed me," Lorenzo said, but the words came out hollow, unconvincing even to his own ears. "And you betrayed me," Amelia replied. So are we just going to keep destroying each other? Is that all we know how to do? He looked at the weapon in his hand, at Ethan, bleeding and broken, at Amelia, standing between them with nothing but faith and impossible courage. The moment stretched, suspended like the breath before a storm breaks. 3 years of hunting compressed into this single choice. 3 weeks of falling in love balanced against 3 years of rage. Everything he'd been taught, every lesson about power and revenge and never showing weakness, screamed at him to pull the trigger. But then he remembered Daniel's hands covered in paint, teaching without words. He remembered Sister Evelyn asking if he could forgive. He remembered Amelia saying that pain doesn't have to stay pain, that transformation was possible if you were brave enough to try. He thought of Sister Evelyn asking if he could forgive when forgiveness seemed impossible. He thought of Amelia's painting, a man choosing to be defined by something other than the weapon in his hands, and he made his choice. The gun clattered to the floor. Lorenzo pulled off his jacket and tore it into strips, moving to Ethan's side. "Keep pressure here," he instructed Amelia, his voice rough with emotion. "He's losing too much blood." She stared at him, shock and confusion warring across her face. "What are you doing?" "Something different." He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Federal Agent Morrison? This is Lorenzo DeLuca. I have information about illegal arms deals, mine, my father's organization, and others. I'm ready to cooperate. Full immunity for my witness, and I need an ambulance at 147 Bowen Street immediately." Ethan's eyes widened. "Why would you—" "Because your sister taught me something," Lorenzo said, pressing the makeshift bandage to Ethan's shoulder with steady hands. "She taught me that you can transform pain if you're brave enough, that hands can create instead of destroy, that some things matter more than revenge." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver lighter, worn smooth from years of use, his initials engraved on the side. He placed it in Amelia's trembling hand, closing her fingers around it gently. "My father gave this to me the day I took over his business," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers. "He said it represented what we do. We light fires and we control them. But I don't want to burn anymore. I want to build." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture both tender and final. "This is yours now, because you showed me who I used to be before the Mafia made me into something else, before blood and loyalty became the only language I knew." His voice cracked. "You showed me there's still something worth protecting in this world, and it's not power or territory or revenge. It's people like you who choose hope even when it costs everything." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer. Amelia looked down at the lighter, then up at him, her face a landscape of conflicting emotions, anger, grief, confusion, and something else. Something that looked almost like understanding. "I don't know if I can forgive this," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you to believe that people can change, that I want to change. That meeting, you changed me already, even if it's too late for us." The room flooded with red and blue light. Federal agents poured through the door, weapons drawn, commands sharp and overlapping in the chaos. Lorenzo raised his hands slowly, never breaking eye contact with Amelia. "I came to Boston with a gun and your brother's name on my conscience," he said as they moved to cuff him. "But you taught me that some things matter more than the Mafia, more than revenge, more than pride." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You matter more. And if turning myself in, if testifying against my own family, if spending the rest of my life making amends means you and your brother get to live safely, then it's worth it. What about your life? She asked, tears streaming down her face. This is the first day of my life that actually matters. Marco appeared at the edge of the scene, watching his boss, his friend, walk willingly into federal custody. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Lorenzo nodded once. Permission granted. Marco pulled out his own phone. Agent Morrison, add my name to that cooperation list. As they led Lorenzo out into the cold October night, he looked back once. Amelia stood in the doorway, her brother being loaded into an ambulance behind her, the silver lighter clutched in her hand like an oath. She didn't wave, didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. And somehow, despite everything, that was enough. 1 year later, autumn returned to Boston in shades of amber and gold, the air carrying whispers of approaching winter. At St. Catherine's Church, a new painting hung beside the altar, an oil canvas showing a man standing among sunflowers, his empty hands open to the light. His face was peaceful now, no longer haunted. The plaque beneath it read, "The Man Without the Gun." A. Morel. Amelia stood before the painting, making a final adjustment to its position. Sister Evelyn appeared at her shoulder, her weathered face creased with approval. "It's beautiful, child. It's honest," Amelia said softly. "That's harder to paint than beautiful." She'd spent the year rebuilding piece by piece, teaching art to her students, creating new work, processing grief and betrayal, and the strange, complicated grace of watching someone choose transformation over destruction. Her brother was in witness protection somewhere in the Midwest, safe, sober, working at a hardware store under a new name. They spoke every Sunday, carefully reconstructing trust from the rubble of old mistakes. Ethan had testified against the weapons dealers who'd supplied him, helping the FBI dismantle a trafficking network that had operated for decades. And Lorenzo? Lorenzo's testimony had convicted 12 people, including 3 of his father's oldest partners. The DeLuca crime family had collapsed, its empire reduced to arrests and seized assets. He'd been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, then quietly disappeared into a new life. Or so the official story went. Sister Evelyn had pressed a folded piece of paper into Amelia's hand 3 months ago. Just an address in a small coastal town in Maine, written in careful script. No explanation, no instruction, just a choice left in her hands. It took her 3 more months to gather the courage to drive north. The shop was called Second Chances Woodworking. Amelia parked outside, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Through the dusty window, she could see him, older somehow, despite only a year having passed. His hair was longer, touched with gray at the temples. His movements were slower, more deliberate. He was planing a piece of oak, his focus absolute, his hands creating instead of destroying. She pushed open the door. A bell chimed softly. Lorenzo looked up. The plane stilled in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Amelia? Her name on his lips, spoken in his true voice, no more lies between them, made her eyes burn. "Hi," she managed. He set down the plane carefully, wiping sawdust from his hands. "I didn't think I'd see you again. I wasn't sure I should come. But you did." Something vulnerable flickered across his face. Why? She walked deeper into the small shop, running her fingers along the finished pieces. A rocking chair, a small table, a child's toy chest carved with waves and boats. "Your testimony helped convict 12 people. she said quietly. My brother's testimony supported yours. Together, you dismantled an organization that operated for 40 years. The FBI told me your cooperation was unprecedented. I did what needed to be done. They said you refused witness protection. I did. Why? Lorenzo gestured to the workshop. Humble, honest, covered in sawdust and the clean scent of fresh-cut wood. Because I wanted to build something, even if it's just furniture, even if no one ever knows my name. I spent 38 years breaking things and calling it power. I wanted to know what it felt like to create something that helps people instead of hurts them. Amelia reached into her bag and pulled out the silver lighter. She set it on his workbench, the engraved initials catching the afternoon light filtering through the window. I think this belongs to you now. He looked at it for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. No, I gave that to you because I meant it. Then consider it returned. She met his eyes. Because I think you've earned the right to define yourself now. Not by what your father gave you, not by what the Mafia made you, but by what you're choosing to build with your own hands. Lorenzo picked up the lighter, turning it over in his scarred, sawdust-covered hands. I thought you'd hate me for the lies, for what I almost did, for being exactly the kind of person you dedicate your life to teaching children to avoid. I did hate you, she said with careful honesty, for about 3 months. And then I realized something. The man who lied to me was trying to become someone better. And the man who told the truth gave up everything to actually become that person. She moved closer. You didn't just spare my brother, Lorenzo. You saved him. You turned yourself in. You testified against your own family. You've spent a year in a place where nobody knows your name, building furniture for strangers and living with your choices. That's not redemption. That's just, it's enough. Her voice carried absolute conviction. It's more than enough. You chose mercy when revenge would have been easier. You chose accountability when running would have been simpler. You chose to become the man in that painting instead of the man you were raised to be. They stood in the sawdust-scattered silence, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way and somehow survived. I'm opening a community art center next month, Amelia said carefully, for children and adults who need a safe space to create. It's not large, and funding is challenging, but Sister Evelyn donated the building. An old warehouse, actually. I'm going to need furniture, tables, easels, storage, and I could use someone who understands second chances. Amelia, I'm not asking for romance, she said quickly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Too much has happened. Too many lies between us. But I'm asking if you'd be willing to try friendship. Real friendship. Built on truth this time. No false names. No hidden agendas. Just two people who believe transformation is possible. That the past doesn't have to define the future. That we can choose who we become. Lorenzo felt that familiar crack in his chest. The one that had started the night he walked into the wrong restaurant and found exactly what he needed. I'd like that, he said quietly. More than I can say. She held out her hand. He took it, and this time the touch carried no weight of deception, just the tentative warmth of new beginnings built on hard-won truth. Also, Amelia added, her eyes holding a hint of cautious humor, if you ever want to learn to paint properly, I'm told I'm a decent teacher. I'm terrible at art. You saw my boat. I remember. She laughed. That sound he'd carried through a year of lonely nights and hard penance. But that's the point. Everyone starts somewhere, even men who used to solve problems with guns. They walked out of the shop together into the Maine afternoon. The lighthouse was visible in the distance, its beam beginning to sweep across the gray-blue water as evening approached. Lorenzo locked the door, the silver lighter secure in his pocket, not as a reminder of who he'd been, but as proof of who he was becoming. "Where do we start?" he asked. Amelia looked at the ocean, then back at him, her smile carrying hard-won wisdom. "The same place every meaningful story starts, with someone brave enough to walk through the wrong door and discover it led exactly where they needed to be." 2 years after that, the Community Art Center's grand opening filled 3 renovated buildings: studios for children, workshops for adults, and a gallery where Amelia's paintings hung alongside her students' work. The furniture throughout the space carried Lorenzo's signature: simple, solid, built to last. Ethan had sent flowers with a card. "Proud of you, sis. Thanks for not giving up on broken things. Tell Lorenzo I'm grateful for everything." Marco had sent an anonymous donation that funded a full scholarship program for children from difficult backgrounds. Redemption rippled outward in unexpected ways. Lorenzo stood in the corner, watching Amelia greet visitors with that unstoppable warmth that had first changed his life. His hands were permanently stained with wood finish now, his wardrobe reduced to work clothes and flannel. The Mafia felt like something that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. In the center's main hall, above the fireplace Lorenzo had built from reclaimed wood, hung the updated masterpiece, The Man Without the Gun. The figure's face clearer now, his expression at peace, his empty hands reaching toward golden light. Amelia found him as the evening wound down, sliding her hand into his with the comfortable familiarity they'd built over 2 years of honest friendship that had slowly, carefully become something more. "You built something beautiful here," she said, gesturing to the space, the furniture, the life they'd constructed from ruins. "We built it," he corrected. "You showed me how. You showed me that transformation isn't just possible. It's the most motivational thing we can do. That we don't have to stay what we were. That every ending can become a new beginning, if we're brave enough." She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, no longer tentative, no longer afraid of destroying something precious. They'd earned this through honesty, accountability, and the slow, difficult work of becoming people they could be proud of. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The certainty? The control?" Lorenzo thought about it with characteristic honesty. "Sometimes. The way you might miss a fever. It felt overwhelming while I was in it. But waking up was the real gift. The Mafia gave me control over everything except myself. This," he gestured to the room, to her, to the quiet life they'd built. "This is actual freedom. Even though it's smaller, it's not smaller. It's everything that matters." She turned to face him fully, her eyes shining with emotion. "I love you. I wanted you to finally hear me say that clearly. I've loved you since the moment I walked through the wrong door," Lorenzo replied. "And I'll spend every remaining day proving I'm worth that gift." They kissed then, unhurried, honest, 2 people who'd chosen each other, not despite their scars, but because of everything they'd learned while healing them. Outside, the last light faded into evening. The center's windows glowed warm and golden, a beacon for anyone lost in the dark, searching for the door that would lead them home. He came with a gun, but left with every reason to live. Have you ever wondered if people can truly change? If the past can be transformed instead of just forgotten? This story says yes, but only through the hard work of accountability, mercy, and choosing love over revenge. Every ending is just a new beginning, another chance to choose hope over fear, forgiveness over bitterness, building over breaking. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of redemption, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to transform. Because the most inspirational stories aren't about people who never fall. They're about people who get back up and build something beautiful from the broken pieces. This is a story about romance, yes, but it's also about moral accountability, about facing consequences instead of running, about refusing to let violence define your future. It's about love that demands we become better, not love that overlooks harm. Share this story with someone who needs to remember. It's never too late to put down what's destroying you and pick up what could save you. Thank you for spending this hour with us. We'll be here tomorrow evening with another story of love, loss, and the transformative power of choice. Until then, may you always have the courage to walk through the wrong door and discover it was right all along. Subscribe for more stories of love, loss, and redemption.